The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
It is now 12 minutes after 8. A very good morning indeed and a warm welcome to the Forum at 8 here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Well, as we heard in our news, issues around mining back under the spotlight again today. There is something in relation to Kusasa Lethu mine where AMCU is taking this matter to court now. But of course, big issue last week, government and ANC publicly reacting with anger to Amplats' announcement of a review plan that will cost 14,000 jobs and 400,000 ounces of platinum production. Amplats told us last week that there are operational and economic reasons for this, but government, on the other hand, threatening in response to scrutinize the company's mining license. There's been so much commentary following that, and today, of course, we'd like to give you an opportunity to comment about this matter. Remember, you can do so at 34701, which is our SMS line here on the program, 34701. Also, I'll be taking emails and SMSs. Emails at gwala@sabc.co.za. gwala@sabc.co.za. We'll open the lines for you as well. 0891 104 208. 0891 104 208. I'll be talking to commentators in this space who obviously know more about these issues, and I'll introduce them to you in a minute. But also there was an interesting commentary, I thought, which was in the Mail and Guardian, the editorial of the Mail and Guardian last week. I'm just going to read a paragraph from that editorial. It says, "Let us be quite clear about this. There is nothing particularly surprising or indeed objectionable about a mining minister who represents a broadly left-wing government reacting angrily to a plan that will cost 14,000 jobs and 400,000 ounces of platinum production. Amplats' restructuring proposals, which will put 4 huge shafts on care and maintenance, in effect mothballing them, will have catastrophic consequences for workers and for the Rustenburg area, and they will cut into vital export volumes. Amplats' chief executive Chris Griffith's proposal may be rational and necessary, but to expect a complete lack of political and regulatory pushback is absurd. But the detail of Mining Minister Susan Shabangu's response, and even harder line taken by ANC policy czar Enoch Godongwana, reveals the profound confusion that is at the heart of the ruling party's relationship with the extractive sector in this country." It's a very long editorial, but it starts there. I suppose we get the sense out of that. Let me ask Kuseni Dlamini, who's the former head of Anglo-American SA and former director of Anglo-American Platinum, who's on the line for me. Very good morning to you, Mr. Dlamini.
Very good morning to you as well, Xolani. Thank you very much indeed for having me on your program.
Compliments. Thanks indeed for your time. Also joining me, Peter Leon. He is the head of Africa Mining and Energy Projects at Weber Wenzel. Peter, nice talking to you again.
Yes, good to speak to you this morning.
Much appreciated. Let me start with Kuseni Dlamini. Your response, particularly to that editorial I just read from the Mail and Guardian.
Well, it just highlights the complexity of the challenges. I mean, the fact is here, the industry is in dire straits, and it has to consider radical interventions to turn around its fortunes and put itself on a profit path. And what is also important is that the country is also in a very desperate state in terms of jobs, and we know that regions like Rustenburg are heavily reliant on mining. So I think the editorial just captures the nature of the frustration largely on the government and community side, and as well as the need to be sensitive to those issues. But what is also important is really, it's not an either or, it's an and. We need to balance the interest of shareholders, of workers, and of government and the community at large.
Interesting, because I think you wrote an opinion piece a day after the announcement was made, and I saw it on Business Report. And part of what you were saying, you were arguing in that piece, is that it's not the first time that something like this has happened. Something similar happened in the gold mining industry about 10 years ago.
Absolutely, Xolani. About 10 years ago, the gold industry realized that the deepening and aging shafts were becoming costly and therefore unsustainable, and serious choices have to be made, and that partly entailed systematically and carefully managing in a very organized way a number of workers are out of the gold mining industry. We all know that the gold mining industry was a major employer of workers, and today the numbers are a fraction of what they used to be. But what is important about what happened in the gold industry about 10 years ago was that the process was done in an inclusive and coordinated way, and in fact, in most instances, there was not even a strike. I remember, for example, at Anglo Gold Ashanti, which is a company that I also worked for, where we had to get rid of a lot of workers, but what was important was to establish consultative forums that involve government, labor, as well as ourselves at the time, and that actually ensured that the process was managed differently and much better. And I'm sure that this is what Anglo Platinum is trying to do, and Chris has been trying very hard to reach out to labor and also reach out to the government. And we've seen recently a meeting of minds, at least the beginning of talks between Platinum and the government.
So, but in essence, what you would then be arguing is that perhaps Chris mishandled the situation before making the announcement. He should have consulted widely.
Not at all. I'm not in a position to be able to make that kind of judgment. And I do know that, having been part of that group, that consultation is at the top of how things are done in that business. And I have no doubt at all that under Chris's leadership, that philosophy of respecting social partners continues. And I am sure that in this instance, there must have been attempts which have been made to engage, and there must have been some engagements that have taken place. You saw yourself, or you heard yourself in the interviews that you did, that Anglo Platinum was saying they consulted, and the Department of Mineral Resources was saying something different. The truth may be somewhere in between. But nevertheless, what is important is not looking at the past, looking at the present and the future. How can we make the most out of this situation, use it as an opportunity to rally around positive and constructive solutions rather than perpetuate the division that we're seeing, which is really harmful to the country's standing as an investment destination.
Peter, let me get your thoughts then. Is it still possible to get a positive outcome out of this? Because the reality is that the ANC government is saying 14,000 people will be out on the streets. We can't afford that. But again, as I mentioned, you have Amplats on the other hand saying that there are economic realities that we have to face.
Yeah, look, Kalani, I think the whole what happened last week is very unfortunate, and I completely agree with what Kuseni's just said, and particularly the model he was talking about in terms of the gold mining industry. But I think there's been a lot of shouting. Hopefully, cooler heads will now prevail, and it's good that the company and the government are now talking, and hopefully there will be less rhetoric and more action around this. One of the things that I think sight's been lost of in all of this is the fact that Anglo Platinum has said that they will try as far as possible to find jobs for all the people who are being retrenched. And they're putting, I think the figure was something like 800 million rand, which is a lot of money, it's nearly R1 billion, into a social fund to deal with the situation, which that really is a substantial sum. But the point I want to make is that I think it would be helpful, and hopefully this is where we're going to go, that there's less rhetoric and more discussion around this issue.
And if there were to be more discussion, what should be the point of discussions be, Peter?
Well, look, the thing is that the government's always talked about a tripartite relationship, and that's what Kuseni was touching on, that government, labour and business talks about these things through MIGDET, which is the Mine Industry Growth Development and Employment Task Team, which is supposed to deal with these things. And the fact that there was this attack on the company last week just seems to me to throw this tripartite relationship that's supposed to exist out the window.
Because I just wonder, though, about how much of the machinations, the shenanigans do we know? Somebody said to me, for instance, and I'm going to throw this out, that to what extent would the ANC be angered by the fact that prior to Mangaung, for instance, they defended the mining industry against the ANC Youth League that wanted nationalization. And less than a month afterwards, you have a situation where Amplats then is saying, well, 14,000 jobs will be out there, and the ANC is probably saying, well, you're betraying us here. And Peter, what are your thoughts?
Look, I have heard that comment, and I think on the face of it, it sounds like a fair comment. But I have to say that this issue with the review of Amplats' operations and the fact the company found itself in so much financial difficulty, the sort of thing that Chris Griffith's been talking about, this has been known for a year. This review has been talked about, it's been written about, the company announced it a year ago. So, the government can't say that this just came. I mean, the level of the retrenchments may have been a complete surprise, but the fact that the review was going on and the company had to do something, about the fact that they had ever-rising costs and pretty much static prices, and that was having a huge effect on their profitability. That's a well-known fact. So, I think you need to take that into account. But I mean, I can see the argument about, the government the ANC goes into battle, the leadership does, against the Youth League on nationalisation. Then all of a sudden, the company comes out with that announcement. I can see that argument, but you need to look at what happened before.
Kuseni?
If I can just come in on that, Kolani, I agree entirely with what Peter has said. And the other point that we need to focus on is really whether or not the South African mining industry is globally competitive. We know that there was a commodities boom on which we missed, and we also know that now there is a trend in global sentiment towards being more positive, and in fact mining stocks that out of South Africa are doing relatively better, and South African mining stocks are doing worse than their peers also in the world, largely because of the domestic issues around labor unrest, around the perceived bad relationship between government and the industry. We really need to look at what is it that we need to do collectively to make sure that the South African mining industry in general, and the platinum industry in particular, are globally competitive. And that requires us to move beyond finger pointing and short-term point scoring. And it requires government and business to talk the same language and to stand shoulder to shoulder for the interest of the workers who are employed in that industry, and also the other unemployed people that still want to be employed in the industry. We're in a very fortunate position that we have the largest endowment in terms of mineral resources in the world. And let's use this as a catalyst to create more jobs. And to think that we can lose jobs simply because of either bad policies or perceived bad relationships between government and business, or perceived bad relationships between labor and management, it's really a fault of ours that we can correct.
Sure. Let me open the lines here because I'm going to come back to those points, and I think they are very important points to discuss. 0891 104 208, that's the number to dial this morning if you want to weigh in on this discussion. 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208. Let's pick up on those issues then. Peter, because one wonders whether what has happened at Amplats is only but just the tip of the iceberg, that we are likely to see more job losses in other mines if the economic conditions that have been articulated by Chris Griffiths and others are anything to go by.
I think it's a real possibility. Becky Sabia, who's the head of the Chamber of Mines, said that, I think, back in November, December, that, especially in the platinum sector, was what you've had is wage increases which are generally well above the rate of inflation, and cost pressures which are pretty unsustainable. So something has to give, and obviously what normally gives in that situation is employment. And this is very worrying in a country which has an endemically high unemployment. So this is a real risk to the mining industry and to the platinum industry in particular. It's not just an issue for Anglo Platinum.
But what is at the heart of this uncompetitiveness of the mining sector in this country? Is it simply local domestic policy issues, or are there other factors that we should consider?
No, there are a whole range of factors. Kuseni is absolutely right. I mean, the policy uncertainty has been a problem because that affects investment sentiment. And quite frankly, the minister's attack on the industry, just does that a further disservice last week. But the policy uncertainty, the regulatory uncertainty we've had since the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act was passed and came into force in 2004 is a problem. But, I mean, at the end of the day, the industry is a price taker. I mean, these are international prices. You have a situation where you have ever-increasing costs, which are both labor costs and energy costs increasing at 20% a year recently, 16% a year probably going forward. So these are huge cost pressures on the industry. I mean, the platinum industry, I read a figure the other day saying that labor costs are now something like 40% of the platinum industry's costs, and they're spiking upwards. So you've got all these pressures. You've got the cost pressures, you've got the regulatory issues. So some of these issues are domestic, and the prices are international.
It's interesting because obviously you talk about the issues of electricity and those issues. If you were to put those aside and look at policy matters, and if you compare us to other mining countries, people, for instance, cite Chile, where there are similar problems. State-owned copper miner Codelco, seriously, there are problems between government and that mine. In Australia, mining companies at war with the Labour government over efforts to increase the tax take from the resources. In France, ArcelorMittal also recently threatened with nationalization by the industry minister after it announced plans to close 2 blast furnaces at a cost of slightly more than 600 jobs. So the point that's being made here is that these discussions are all over the world. Why then are we suffering here?
Well, let me say this, look, there are issues in all the countries you've mentioned, but Chile is held out by all experts as the leading developing country in the world in terms of its mineral regulatory system. And I can tell you this much, and I've been there, the mining licenses in Chile are not granted by bureaucrats, they're granted by the courts. And the mineral regulatory regime in Chile is completely objective, and there's almost no discretion involved. And that was a conscious decision made post-Pinochet when democracy came to Chile. So in Australia, obviously, there have been issues over the resource rent tax, which has really created a lot of problems for the Labour government, as you correctly say. But, the problem in South Africa is that we've had all of these issues plus more, and we've got all these domestic cost pressures. I think that's the difference.
Okay. Right, I'll take calls. Is it Dr. Rangaga in Midrand, Gift in Port Elizabeth, Mike in Newlands? But let me take a quick break first.
Leonard has found a focus for his attentions. Doris from accounts. He asks her on a date.
He told me we were going to see a copy because I like copies. And what does he show me? A copy of his windscreen. Real cheap, he says. He tried to kiss me and I remember that PG glass never fit copies. They only use genuine glass parts that fits perfectly. I also remember their number 0860 03 03 03. I should tell Leonard about PG glass. I look at him and changed my mind.
Are you an entrepreneur in the construction industry who turns over 2.5 million rand a year or more? Race Corp is offering 250,000 rand in business support and 50,000 rand business investment to 10 passionate black entrepreneurs in the construction industry. Contact Seppo at Race Corp on 011 566 2000 or visit us online at racecorp.com. That is RAIZCORP.com.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Right, let me start with Dr. Rangaga in Midrand. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Xolani.
Hi, thank you.
Yes, my contribution relates to the responsibility of unions and employees to make sure that an enterprise succeeds and becomes profitable. It looks like unions, their only focus is on dismantling the profitability of organizations.
You think unions are responsible for what happened at Amplats?
No. What happened at Amplats? The fact that the union starts from the position of we want more money for the employee, and the owner wants more profit. They have to talk. They have to say. There has to be progress. The union must say that we want to make the place work and we want the environment to be improved at the same time. There has to be that agreement. But my take is that the unions are actually bent on making everything ungovernable.
Oh, that's interesting, Dr. Rangaga, because on the next line I've got Ivan Jim, who is the NUMSA General Secretary. Mr. Jim, hello. How do you respond to Dr. Rangaga then?
No, I think Dr. Ranga must relax. He must accept that South African mining industry and the rest of other sectors in this country, they have thrived, they have succeeded, they have accumulated profit at the back of exploiting black and African labor, what we call super exploitation. And the time for that is over. And there's no amount of scarecrow of global nonsense that gets thrown to us that is going to pull us back and allow workers. And this thing can be done. You can compare workers, how workers are paid in Australia, how workers are paid in New Zealand and somewhere else. And you look where South African workers are and what are their conditions. So there's a lot of hogwash, Xolani, about trying to shift this crisis in the platinum industry into workers. We should threaten this one company and take the rest of other companies in the platinum industry. 5 years from, if you were to go back 5 years, these companies have made about 160 billion. With whom has that money been shared with? And I think we as the movement led by the ANC, we must learn hard lessons from this. That our dilly-dallying instead of making sure that we decisively intervene in making sure that our own strategic minerals are used in the best interest of the country. Call it nationalization, but as long as we take decision and we're able to explain, that's what is at the heart of this. Once capital have its legs, then that's what they do. It's an offensive. There's no other way that we must not interpret this other way around.
So you agree that it was a betrayal? You agree that it was a betrayal by Amplats to immediately after Mangaung come out and say they are firing, axing 14,000 workers after the ANC had defended defended against nationalization?
But it depends how unsustainable is that decision that you can have your own. I mean, just now we're dealing with ESCOM, who is actually making money out of our coal in this country. It's the oligarchy that basically is owning and controlling the coal industry. When in fact that's our resources, our own ESCOM, which is a national asset, cannot be able to supply us. Instead, it is killing industry.
All right, that's Ivan Jim. He is the Secretary General of NUMSA. Thank you very much for your call. What I'll do is I'll Gift and PE, Mike and Newlands and others, please hold for me. I'll take more calls, 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
It is now 24 minutes before 9 and we continue talking about the announcement that came through last week from Amplats. Of course, the reaction by government and the African National Congress to that announcement. Lots of comments already being made in this regard. What I need to do now, because Mr. Peter Leon is going to go very soon, is before I get his last comment, let me welcome now the ANC Secretary General, Mr. Gwede Mantashe, who comes through on the line for me. Mr. Mantashe, good morning. Nice talking to you. Mr. Mantashe, are you there?
Morning, Xolani.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Mantashe. Well, before I just continue, I would like to get your thoughts about where the process is. A report yesterday was suggesting that there are talks already now underway between particularly government and Amplats. What is the state of affairs?
That's how it should be in the first place, instead of a company going out and pronounce what should be an outcome of a process. That's what we call arrogant and reckless on the part of Amplats. The fact that their engagement with government, with the unions, is the correct way of doing it.
And earlier on I had a call from Mr. Ivan Jim, who says, well, the ANC should learn some lessons out of this.
No, you see, he must rise to the occasion, Ivan. You don't say, I told you so, when there is a crisis. As if he's complaining of ESCOM, which is nationalized, and say the decision is a disaster. It's a contradiction in terms. He must not do that. He must argue and debate policy issues and an approach and deal with the problem. That is the right way of doing things. Now, the reality of the matter is Anglo Platinum, and I listened to your panelists there, who was making all sorts of statements about policy uncertainty. What is this policy uncertainty that he's talking about? We've gone through the conference. There is now policy certainty. The reality of the matter is that mining is spoiled. They want to eat their cake and still have it.
How so, though? Because the argument by Amplats, for instance, Mr. Mantashe, is that there are economic reasons, compelling economic reasons why they should do this review.
That are not discussed first, that are announced by only one party that is involved, and not share with the other parties before you take a decision.
There's even an argument, by the way, about whether there were any talks that took place, because as when I spoke to the Minister, Susan Shabangu, as well as Chris Griffith, there were reports that we called so-and-so, we had a meeting, we didn't have a meeting. But the reality is that Amplats is coming up and saying, well, global economic conditions are adverse at the moment. They are difficult for us. So we have to do something in order to keep the business sustainable.
Chris Griffiths must appreciate the fact that he's a mining company in South Africa. They've stolen our money. They're now a British company, but they still have a responsibility to talk to South Africa on the operations in South Africa. They can't just behave as a visitor here when they have mines here.
They've stolen the money?
They've stolen our money and listed in London Stock Exchange and now become a British company.
But they were allowed.
That company was built on the back of South African capital and labor.
But they were allowed to do that. It's not like
they were allowed
by the
wrong
government
decision again.
Yeah, but they were allowed by the government.
The fact is, you steal our money, you become a British company, you treat us like a visitor. I think it's one thing that we must actually confront head on, boldly, and actually try to get a solution to it.
The point, though, that also is being put across here by my two earlier guests is really that everyone concerned seems to be mishandling this matter, because the message that it sends out is a message of non-cooperation, that whether you look at
it is not mishandled. Anglo Platinum must deal with South Africa as a country with respect.
You think at the
and
moment
not deal with South Africa as a junior partner and then make pronouncements there because they took a decision in the board and later say then we can talk.
What, in your view, then constitute respectful treatment of South Africa?
It means when there is a problem, you engage partners in South Africa, and then as an outcome of that engagement, you make a pronouncement.
But also you would know there are certain regulations, rules. For instance, even...
And those rules talk to what I'm talking to, Polan.
Yeah, but here are the other rules. If you go to the JSE, for instance, that some information pertaining to the review cannot necessarily be put out there because there will be issues about insider trading and so on. So in the process, you've got to be very careful about who you share that information with.
Who is going to trade? Who is to be subject to insider trading? Is it government and labor?
Right. Let me just go back, because you complained as well about the issues that were raised by my guests about policy inconsistencies. Peter Leon, do you want to respond to what Mr. Madashi is saying?
Well, I'm not going to go on some of the detail about Anglo Platinum, but I will say this, that on the issue of policy uncertainty, this is an issue that's bubbled around since 2004. It's been the subject of comments by the Fraser Institute in Canada. It's the view of very, very many analysts that the policy uncertainty is not simply around the issue of nationalization. It's around the issue of the high levels of discretion in the mining code and the mining charter. And the fact is that mining companies don't always know what they have to comply with in order to get a license. And there's a lot of backdoor discretion in the Act and in the mining charter, and that's had a very inimical effect on investment. And you compare the level of investment going into mining in this country, which goes into other developing countries, the figures are very stark.
But is it not a fair comment?
I mean,
is it not a fair complaint?
Issues come on top
Mr.
of it.
Leon?
That issue's gone away, but the issues around regulatory uncertainty, I'm afraid, still bedevil this industry.
But you see, and again, I'm going to go back to the point I made about Australia and Chile and other mining countries, that when they raise policy issues, is it also always referred to as policy uncertainty? Can we not discuss issues in South Africa without somebody labeling it a policy uncertainty, Mr. Leon?
Well, I mean, the issue in Australia was really over the resource rent tax, and basically the mining companies went into battle with the government. The Prime Minister at the time, Kevin Rudd, lost his job over that issue. The resource rent tax was brought down as a result of that, and it's still under challenge in the courts. But the problem is South Africa suffers from the fact that it's a developing country. But one of the points I was trying to make in relation to Chile is that is also a developing country. Where there, other than the issue of royalties, there has not been that level of policy uncertainty, precisely because the mining licenses, as I said before, are granted by the courts and they're not granted by bureaucrats, and that is very unusual. And that's one of the reasons that Chile is regarded as having the best mining code and regulatory system in the developing world.
Mr. Mandasha, I take that as a sign you want to say something.
Can I make one point?
Yes, please.
You see, can I tell you the worst thing that we are subjected to? Mm-hmm. These South African companies go to Chile, subject them to rules there. They go to Zimbabwe, give away 51%, give to Botswana, go to a 50-50 arrangement, go to Namibia, do the same. When they come to South Africa, we must not think. I think that is the biggest blackmail in approaching South African government. And I think we've given them a leeway for a long time and subjected ourselves to pressure of liberal thinking to a point where the mining companies think that it must be a free-for-all for them.
What's going to happen then next?
They behave differently in all the other countries. When they come here, you can't even think. If you think, you create policy uncertainty.
What's going to happen next, Mr. Madash?
What should happen is that, we have adopted a policy in the conference.
Yeah.
And one of the policy positions we have taken is that The state must take a bigger interest and control in all strategic sectors, including mining. And I think that is what we should do as a country, so that when companies behave in the way that Anglo Platinum is behaving, the policy must change to a point that you want to mothball a shaft, put it up to a public auction, and therefore other operators must take it. That's why when Wasambo said there will be claims, those claims will be paid through that public auction, because any other operator, including the state, must go and bid for that operation.
Okay. I'm going to ask my guest to respond to the point you made earlier on about the inconsistencies. You go to, as you say, Botswana, you go to Zimbabwe. But part of what the mining companies have said in the past in relation to that, Mr. Matashe, is that they want to know what to expect. If they go to Zimbabwe, they know that they expect indigenization that says 51%. If they go to Botswana, they know they're going to go to business with government 50-50. If they go to the DRC, they know what to expect, and that is simply what it is. They are not.
What they know here is that they are given a license to mine unconditionally. They must not abuse that.
All right. Okay. Let me get the last comment from Mr. Leon.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think the point you made, Kalani, to Gwedi Mantashe is absolutely right. That mining companies live with all sorts of things. They can live with lots of rules. They can live with indigenization, but they need to know the rules in advance. The rules can't keep changing. And that's the issue. And that's been the problem for investors in South Africa, that there's a lot of uncertainty. And if you invest now, will the rules change in 10 years' time or in 5 years' time? You have to have that level of predictability.
Rules have not changed. When you submit your application for new order right, you are given that right on clear things. Rules have not changed. Companies change rules as they like. You submit a 50-year plan. After 2 years, you want to change and say, no, it's not right. Who changed the rules? Rules have not changed.
Yeah, but circumstances change. So, I mean, if the economic circumstances change,
when circumstances change,
and your social and labour plan, which you wrote 5 years ago,
when circumstances change,
I mean,
when circumstances change, Mr. Leon, you discuss with the relevant parties. Yeah. You don't just stand on the mountain and announce that will destroy 14,000 jobs.
Mr. Leon, just a last word before I go to Kuseni.
I think the challenge and the opportunity for the mining industry and labour is really to focus on the areas where there is agreement. The Secretary General has highlighted the policy certainty unleashed from the Mangaung conference. I thought that was a golden opportunity for a common discourse that is unifying between the industry and government to really showcase the strides that have been made in terms of taking the issue of nationalization off the table. There are many other issues on which the industry and government and labor agree that can really be the center of focus. But unfortunately, the tendency is that invariably what is spoken about are the issues where there are differences. There is nowhere in the world where you've got absolute policy certainty. That is why in Washington, D.C., you have an industry of lobbyists to try and influence policy in this or that direction. In Brussels, in the EU, you have got an army of lobbyists, people who are earning a living through lobbying. So to the extent that, policy changes over time, there will always be a degree of uncertainty. So we need to have a sense of what is the acceptable degree of uncertainty that we can live with, that we can tolerate in order to keep our industry going, to keep our economy going, to create more decent jobs for people who need jobs in this country.
But clearly, Kuseni, the relationship between the mining industry, the ANC as a party, and government as well, is at its lowest at the moment. How do we improve that? What happens next?
I think the way we are now is an opportunity to really go back to basics and start having meaningful conversations. The Secretary General has touched on very fundamental issues, some of which I can refer to as elephants in the room, which need to be discussed with companies such as Anglo Platinum and Anglo American and other players in the industry. There's a need for a meaningful, open, honest, and transparent conversation that is driven by the interest of South Africa as a country, that is driven by a collective objective by the industry and government to grow and expand the economy in a way that assists us to achieve our macroeconomic objectives.
All right. Please just hold. Let me take Gift now in Port Elizabeth, who's been on the line for a while. Gift, hello.
Olani,
I'm going to come to you, Mr. Mantashe, in a minute.
can I make one point and I leave?
Oh, all right. Okay.
There is no relationship issue between the mining industry and the ANC and government. It at its best. But the mining industry treats that respect and that relationship with utter disdain. We have met that industry. We're talking to it on an ongoing basis. For the first time in a long time, they have never had it so good. And that's why their views were taken into account. Everybody's views were taken into account and went to Pulwana. The mining industry must appreciate that a relationship is serviced. If you don't service it, it collapses.
But let me ask you this. Since when has the industry been treating the government and the ANC with disdain? Is this a new thing? It's
an old thing because it was allowed to be a state within a state under apartheid. We've tried to engage it in the last 3 years. We've actually taken a conscious decision to engage it, move closer to it, talk to them regularly, give them policy propositions in the ANC. They treat that with disdain.
But again, the point is there's no point in shouting at each other from across. The issue is you've got to find each other as the ANC, as the government and as the industry, which is responsible for a substantial part of our GDP in this country.
We'll have to do that. That industry must behave responsible. They will get a reciprocal respect from the ANC.
Right, Mr. Mantashe, I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks indeed. He has to go. There's also Peter Major on the line. I'm going to come to you, Peter Major, in a minute. Gift in Port Elizabeth, you wanted to say something? Gift? Okay, have I lost that call? Mike Newlands, are you still there? Good morning.
Good morning. I am.
Hi.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for taking my
No
call.
problem.
I must say I'm
Go ahead.
absolutely shocked by the Secretary General. I really do believe that if the ANC have just worked out now in the last few years that mines have been stealing from us for 19 or 18 years, this government should resign and resign right now. I just want to know, why is the Harmony Gold Mine not being mentioned? They shed 6,000 jobs. It seems to me that's because it's owned by Zuma's friend Patrick Motsepe, and I just want to know why not discussing
But is it a
that.
fact
And
that it's not being mentioned?
I do feel that Secretary General, if you look at his track record and you listen to his advice he takes from Enoch Dodgonwana, who you mentioned earlier in your show, he is currently, and his wife are implicated in the theft of millions of rands. This is the advisor to the government of millions of rands of workers' money. Now, I really have to ask the question, does Gwedi Mantashe really understand business and business principles? Clearly not. The man is really up against the wall, and I've never heard such a bankrupt statement as that. Thanks, Skolani.
That's Mike in Newlands. Let me hear from Lara Smith. Lara Smith is the MD of Core Consultants. Good morning, Lara.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm very well. What do you make of the argument and discussion?
Yeah, I've been listening to a lot what's going on, and a lot has come out about the unions and divested interest between unions and companies. And I just want to read something which I found on the NUM, or National Union of Mine Workers website, which I don't find helpful at all. The National Union of Mine Workers has repeatedly called upon workers to unite in order to defeat the evil nature of capitalism, which seeks to put profits first and humanity last. And I think it is such comments like that which prevent that kind of discourse which we've been talking about, where government, mines, and labour need to come together to work towards a common solution. If it were true that companies put profits first and humanity last, then Anglo Platinum, who's got an interest in increasing shareholder value as a company, would not, in its first 5 bullet points of a statement when it says to close its fourth shaft, say that it is providing a comprehensive social package, and then list how much it is spending on the social package. It would rather just say what the effect would be to its bottom line. And I think that is very important to remember. Firstly, it's important to remember that this is a proposal. It's not happened yet.
Yeah.
You've still got to go through sections 189 of the labour law, which deals with mass retrenchments. Mm-hmm. And the last thing we've got to bear in mind is that South Africa needs to have a profitable industry in order to create long-term employment. And So that's pretty much where I want to leave it.
Let me ask you this, Lara, because in a country such as South Africa that has 25% unemployment and so on, you really have got to engage the stakeholders before you make a decision about axing 14,000 people.
Yes, which is why this is a proposal.
But again, should you not do it even before you make an announcement, as the ANC has said, as government has said, that you should have consulted us, we should have sat down, we could have probably come up with alternatives together, as opposed to making an announcement, a proposal?
That one I can't comment on. That's beyond my area of expertise with labour law and the proper retrenchment. What I will say is that there's discourse now, they're open to discourse, and they have also mentioned in February last year, if you look at the February 2012 statements, that operations were difficult, global economic conditions were challenging, and they may need to lay off jobs. So this is not a surprise at all. And with the power increases, the poor economic conditions, Europe is one of our biggest trading partners with respect to platinum, the European automobile industry, and that's been suffering greatly. So it's hardly surprising that they would need to start looking at restructuring.
Okay. All right, Lara, let me thank you very much. I have Peter Major also on the line. He's a mining consultant at KD's Corporate Solution. And good to have you again this morning, Peter. Please, your comment for me.
Well, did anybody read the paper today? Because you'll see that in the UK, they're going to lay off 45,000 financial services employees, and they haven't consulted anybody, and they just laid off 15,000 about 3 months ago. So there's 60,000 people laid off, very good jobs with not very much consultation. So we're just one country out of 200 countries. And if you look at the money Amplats put into that, no company has lost more money in the last 3-4 years that I've been covering than Anglo-American and Amplats. They're starting to look like the government, just shoveling billions into loss-making industries.
Peter,
well, maybe Rio Tinto lost as much.
I'm anticipating a response.
Being fired for pumping money in things that don't make money.
Peter, I'm anticipating people will say, well, he's comparing the UK with South Africa, totally two different countries with totally two different challenges.
Well, the challenge is to stay alive. You know, a company's got to stay alive. If it doesn't make money, it dies. And nobody in a company wants it to die. And if you look at how many jobs Amplats has added the last 10 and 15 years, they've added tens of thousands of jobs. So this 14,000 is only 10% of the jobs they've added in the last 20 years. And they've already said a third of them they think they can go to other divisions. So that puts you down to maybe 9,000 that could be retrenched, and they're helping to train those. And as we said earlier, if the platinum price goes up, they might not even have to get rid of those 9,000. But right now they have to do something.
All right, let me just get a quick solution from you, Peter. What should happen going forward?
We need these three parties to quit going to the media because they're not scoring points. They're all looking like fools. They got to go in a room, lock the door, take out the water, and cut the air conditioning. And make these three people work together, government, labor, and the companies, like they did in the 90s when the platinum price was much, much lower than it was now. And these mines were profitable and they were growing. And the people were behaving like adults in the 90s, and now they're behaving like kids.
Kuseni Dlamini, what should happen?
I think there is need for more engagement, and there is a need to focus on building trust. Clearly, there is a trust deficit that is there between government, labor, and the mining industry. But that doesn't mean that the parties don't talk to each other. They talk quite a lot, actually, ironically. But there's a need to really focus on building bridges and making sure that there is a fact-based, honest conversation that takes into account the interests of the different parties.
Okay. Kuseni Dlamini, former head of Anglo-American SA, former director of Anglo-American Platinum. Also would like to thank Peter Leon, head of Africa Mining and Energy Projects, as well as Peter Major, mining consultant, KD's Corporate Solution. We also heard from Mr. Gweda Mantashe, ANC's Secretary General, and also got a call from Lara Smith. and a whole lot of other people. I really, really thank you very much for your views here. Would like to thank the team as well. Our producers, Tracy Bumgard, Sibongile Nhlapo, Wisana Makubela, and Mbulelo Makrubu. Senior producer, Lungile Mabasa. Forum at 8 producers, Jake Mukoma and Mandisa Mcelu. Technical producer today, Mark Prella. Chief producer, Budzilu Koto. Executive producers, Busi Chane and Oprah Sechi. I'm Xolani Gwala. I shall be back again for you tomorrow, 6 to 9 here on SAFM. 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 6 to 9 here on SAFM.